What if a simple lunch order at a crowded Manhattan restaurant became the thread that unraveled generations of secrets and connected two women from worlds that never should have crossed? Nobody noticed when the elderly Korean woman entered the upscale bistro alone, or when the manager seated her at the worst table near the kitchen doors with obvious disdain, despite her quiet dignity and impeccably tailored suit. The other diners saw just another Asian tourist to ignore, while the staff exchanged glances about the expected minimal tip until a young black waitress approached with a warm smile and greeted her in perfect Korean. The single tear that slid down the billionaire CEO's weathered cheek told a story of recognition spanning oceans and decades that would forever alter both their lives before the appetizers even arrived. Mrs. Kim Soo-jin watched the young waitress move between tables with a grace that sent shivers down her spine, as forgotten memories surged forward like waves breaking against a shore long abandoned. Amber carried herself with shoulders slightly forward and head tilted, when concentrating exactly like someone Mrs. Kim had known intimately in another lifetime across an ocean and half a century ago. The cacophony of Manhattan power lunches surrounded her at La Maison Dorée, where finance titans negotiated deals over foie gras and politicians whispered scandals into crystal glasses of $100 wine, but all Mrs. Kim could hear was the echo of her own heartbeat accelerating with each glimpse of this stranger with hauntingly familiar eyes. Crystal chandeliers caught afternoon sunlight and scattered rainbow prisms across white tablecloths, while Mrs. Kim ran one finger along the edge of her water glass, remembering calloused hands from decades spent scrubbing dishes in a Seoul kitchen where she once worked 16-hour days for pennies before ambition and necessity forged her into the steel magnate whose name now adorned skyscrapers across 3 continents. When Amber returned, balancing a crystal water pitcher, Mrs. Kim spoke softly in Korean, asking how such perfect pronunciation had found its way onto the tongue of a young black American woman in a Manhattan restaurant. Surprise bloomed across Amber's face, followed by a smile that transformed her features from pretty to luminous, as she responded in the same language, explaining her adoption by Minnesota academics at 4 months old and her recent journey to discover her birth heritage through language study at university. Mrs. Kim nodded, slowly absorbing each word, while her mind calculated dates and possibilities against the statistical improbability of coincidences, this precise in a city of 8 million souls, where fate had somehow seated her in the section of this particular server on this unremarkable Tuesday. Around them, wealthy patrons summoned waitstaff with imperious gestures or dismissive waves, never making eye contact with those they considered servants, while Amber stood straight-backed before Mrs. Kim, answering questions with a dignity that transcended her station in this temporary hierarchy of service and consumption. Neither woman belonged fully in their current worlds, Mrs. Kim realized, watching recognition flicker in Amber's eyes when she asked about regional dialects, and noting how the young woman navigated spaces clearly designed to make outsiders feel unwelcome, just as Mrs. Kim herself had done through boardrooms and country clubs across decades of climbing social ladders built specifically to exclude women like her. Something ancient and powerful stretched between them in that moment, unnamed yet undeniable as sunlight through beveled glass transformed ordinary water into momentary diamonds, much like circumstance had pressured coal into something precious, unexpected, and rare within both their lives. Friends, before we go further, may I ask a small favor? Please subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us keep bringing you these stories, and reaching 1,000 subscribers soon is so important for us to continue. We also love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how our little storytelling circle is spreading across the world. And if you enjoyed the beginning, give this video a like and let's share thoughts on the whole story together below. Amber returned with an artfully arranged plate of sea bass, placing it before Mrs. Kim with a respectful slight bow that seemed instinctual rather than practiced, while nearby, a table of investment bankers barely paused their boisterous conversation about yacht purchases to acknowledge their own food arrival. The young waitress lingered a moment longer than service required, explaining how learning Korean had started as a college project, but evolved into an obsession as she discovered comfort in sounds that felt mysteriously familiar to her, tongued despite never hearing them in childhood. A silver-haired man at the adjacent table gestured sharply for service, knocking his glass and sending burgundy liquid cascading across the white tablecloth onto Amber's pressed black uniform pants without even glancing up from his phone. Call or pausing to acknowledge the incident with anything beyond an irritated wave, suggesting she handle the mess he created. Mrs. Kim observed this exchange with face carefully composed into practiced neutrality, though decades of boardroom negotiations had not completely eliminated the slight narrowing of her eyes that signaled controlled fury to those who knew how to interpret the micro-expressions of powerful women accustomed to concealing their true reactions. Amber apologized unnecessarily as she dabbed at her stained clothing before hurrying to fetch replacement linens, her professional smile never wavering, though Mrs. Kim noted the tightness around her eyes that spoke of practiced resilience against casual indignities. The restaurant swelled with lunchtime chaos as servers navigated between tables carrying overflowing plates, while managers hovered near wealthier patrons, offering obsequious attention that never extended to tables like Mrs. Kim's tucked near swinging kitchen doors despite her tailored Chanel suit that cost more than most annual salaries. During brief moments between courses, Amber shared fragments of her life, working morning shifts at a coffee shop before afternoon restaurant service, followed by evening hours at the campus library, struggling to maintain her education after losing a crucial scholarship due to budget cuts at her university. Mrs. Kim asked thoughtful questions about subjects and career aspirations, without volunteering information about her own extensive business holdings or the educational foundation she had established specifically for women of color in STEM fields. Though something sparked behind her carefully neutral expression with each new detail, Amber revealed about her birth date and adoption circumstances. Around them, conversations about stock portfolios and vacation properties created a suffocating atmosphere of casual wealth and privilege that seemed determined to remind both women of their outsider status in different ways, whether through the manager's frequent pointed glances at Mrs. Kim's table suggesting she should finish quickly, or the dismissive snaps of fingers directed at Amber from impatient diners accustomed to treating service workers as furniture rather than humans. The weight of recognition continued growing in Mrs. Kim's dark eyes measuring Amber's features against memories she had locked away for decades, finding matches in the arch of eyebrows and the particular way her wrists turned when gesturing that statistics alone could never explain. A way as random genetic coincidence. The intimate bubble surrounding their conversation burst suddenly as a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit approached their table with undisguised shock, transforming his features from professional composure to genuine surprise as he recognized the diminutive woman delicately cutting her fish into precise bites. Mrs. Kim Soo-jin. "What an unexpected pleasure to find you dining among us mere mortals today," he exclaimed with a deferential bow, completely inappropriate for the casual setting yet performed without self-consciousness or concern for the curious. Glances now turning their way from neighboring tables. His voice carried just enough to attract attention from nearby diners, causing a ripple effect of whispered recognition, spreading outward through the restaurant like stones disturbing still water. "Chairwoman Kim, I was just discussing the Singapore acquisition with your executive team this morning, but they never mentioned you were in New York personally," he continued while Amber stood frozen beside them, clutching her serving tray as realization dawned that her elderly Korean customer, who had been so kind and interested, was actually the reclusive billionaire CEO whose name adorned the gleaming 70-story tower visible through the restaurant windows. The restaurant atmosphere transformed in seconds as the manager who had earlier seated Mrs. Kim by the kitchen now hurried over with profuse apologies and offers to move her to their finest table while other patrons straightened in their seats, suddenly conscious of the power that had been dining quietly among them unrecognized. and untreated with the deference her position typically commanded. "Mrs." Kim acknowledged her associate with a small nod and minimal words, quietly impressive in her complete lack of need to demonstrate her importance or leverage the obvious discomfort of those who had dismissed her based on appearance. Alone, Amber watched, stunned, as restaurant staff materialized with complimentary champagne, and executives from other tables found transparent excuses to walk past for closer inspection of the legendary businesswoman known for avoiding public appearances and photographs throughout her meteoric rise. From immigrant obscurity to commanding one of the largest privately held conglomerates in the world. When finally alone again, as her unwanted admirer departed with another beau, Mrs. Kim looked up at Amber with eyes holding genuine regret for the interruption and simply said, "Please forgive the disturbance. It seems I cannot escape work even during lunch without acknowledging her wealth or position or explaining why a woman who could dine anywhere on earth with anyone of consequence had chosen this particular restaurant and seemed so intensely interested in one specific waitress." Amber nodded wordlessly, processing the revelation that this gentlewoman asking about her studies and dreams controlled assets worth billions and employed thousands, yet had spent their entire interaction asking questions and listening with authentic interest rather than speaking about herself or leveraging her obvious power for preferential treatment. The sunlight, catching silver strands in Mrs. Kim's elegant chignon, created a momentary halo effect as she gestured slightly, requesting more water, while the weight of unspoken connection hummed between them, charged with new complications and questions as Amber struggled to understand why this extraordinary woman seemed somehow familiar in ways that transcended their brief acquaintance. The restaurant had transitioned into that quiet lull between lunch and dinner service when Mrs. Kim declined coffee but requested a dessert menu, speaking the words in English for the benefit of the hovering manager before switching back to Korean when Amber returned with delicate porcelain plates bearing chocolate soufflés that seemed almost too beautiful to disturb with silver spoons. Perhaps it was the relative privacy afforded by the now half-empty dining room or the courage gathered through their hours of careful conversation, but Mrs. Kim finally asked the question that had been forming since their first exchange, requesting details about Amber's adoption, with a voice so carefully controlled it betrayed the importance beneath its calm surface. The late afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, casting golden light across their table, as Amber explained the limited information she possessed, mentioning the sole orphanage name, Angel's Haven, and her birth date, February 12, 1992. Details recorded in documents her adoptive parents had always shared openly, along with their support of her search for cultural connections. Mrs. Kim nodded slightly with each new piece of information, her composure maintained through decades of high-stakes business negotiations, finally betraying subtle cracks as Amber continued explaining she had been left with only one physical soft connection to her birth mother, a small jade pendant carved with symbols her adoptive parents had preserved, hoping someday it might help identify her origins. Something shifted in Mrs. Kim's expression as Amber described. The pendant, her carefully maintained poise, crumbling momentarily, while her hand moved unconsciously to her collar, where nothing visible hung yet. Fingers traced an absent shape from muscle memory. "Alone. Please, your pendant, may I see it, Mrs. Kim?" asked, voice barely audible above the clink of distant dishware, while her normally steady hands trembled visibly as she reached for her sleek leather handbag resting beside her chair. Amber reached beneath her uniform collar, withdrawing the jade pendant she always wore concealed against her skin, its green surface worn smooth from years of unconscious touching during moments of stress or uncertainty, revealing intricate characters and symbols in an arrangement too specific to be coincidental. The sunlight caught both women's faces, illuminating tears that formed simultaneously as Mrs. Kim withdrew from her purse an identical pendant, its matching jade surface distinguished only by less wear and slightly sharper carved edges preserved in a small velvet pouch rather than worn daily against skin. Their hands extended across the white tablecloth, two identical pieces of carved jade, capturing the afternoon light, while understanding bloomed across Amber's features, her professional waitress composure dissolving completely as mathematical impossibility transformed into undeniable reality between one heartbeat and the next. "Mrs." Kim spoke softly, explaining how jade pendants were sometimes split between family members separated by circumstance. One half kept by the mother, one given to the child, creating physical proof of connection that transcended time and distance. Until reunion might someday occur exactly as legends promised was happening now between them. Words became unnecessary. As both women stared at the matching halves, their tears falling freely now, beyond concern for the few remaining diners or curious staff members witnessing this moment of recognition that answered questions Amber had carried since childhood and fulfilled hopes Mrs. Kim had nurtured across decades of searching, never abandoning faith that someday, somehow, the universe might guide her daughter back into her orbit against all statistical probability. The restaurant had emptied entirely now, save for staff, preparing evening service, affording them a cocoon of privacy within which Mrs. Kim finally unwound the tightly held story she had protected for nearly 30 years, explaining in a voice barely above a whisper how she too had once worn a black uniform and comfortable shoes, serving food to others, though hers had been in a small establishment near the American military base in Seoul during the aftermath of war. Her eyes focused on some distant point beyond the restaurant windows as she described being 18 and beautiful working double shifts to support her widowed mother when she met a kind American soldier whose gentle manner and respect set him apart from others who viewed Korean waitresses as merely entertainment between deployments. Mrs. Kim smiled faintly, recounting their forbidden romance conducted through language barriers and cultural differences, yet genuine in its connection, until his sudden reassignment coincided with the discovery of her pregnancy news. She could never share with him as his letters returned unopened, marked, transferred, without forwarding address. The quiet clink of silverware being sorted at the service station provided rhythmic punctuation to her confession of family shame and social ostracism that followed as her pregnancy became visible, forcing impossible choices between her own future and the welfare of a child whose mixed heritage would ensure a lifetime of discrimination in 1990s Korea, where such children were called troublesome names and denied educational opportunities. Amber sat completely still, absorbing each word as Mrs. Kim described the jade pendant broken in two, one half, kept as her only indulgence while struggling as an immigrant in America, saving every penny from cleaning houses and office buildings at night, while attending community college during days, slowly building the foundation of what would become an international corporation fueled partly by her determination to someday have resources enough to find the daughter she had surrendered. The afternoon light softened into early evening glow as Mrs. Kim explained how she had recognized Amber instantly, not merely through features that echoed her father, but through unconscious mannerisms Mrs. Kim herself possessed, like the particular way Amber tilted her head when listening intently or gestured with her left hand while speaking, characteristics too specific to be coincidental, yet too subtle to be noticed by anyone without the desperate attention of a mother who had memorized her newborn for only 4 precious days before separation. Amber cycled visibly through waves of emotion, shock melting into wonder, calcifying briefly into anger at lost years before dissolving into understanding of the impossible choices facing a young single woman in that time and culture, while tears continued flowing unchecked between questions, clarifying details about her father and circumstances of her birth, each answer building connection across the chasm of years that had separated them. Throughout her confession, Mrs. Kim maintained dignity without pretense or manipulation, explaining her yearly donations to Korean orphanages, her creation of scholarships specifically for mixed race, Korean children, and her persistent hiring of private investigators across decades, all while building her business empire with single-minded focus, knowing financial power might someday facilitate the reunion. She never abandoned hope of achieving, despite statistical improbability. The gentle revelation of how Mrs. Kim had visited this specific restaurant weekly for months after learning Amber worked here, waiting patiently for the courage to approach her, showed the careful respect she maintained for her daughter's autonomy and life choices, even when discovery finally seemed possible, providing the final emotional bridge between their separate lives and shared blood. 3 hours had passed since their initial greeting when the manager approached their table with an insincere smile, explaining they needed to prepare for dinner service while pointedly collecting empty dessert plates and glancing at his watch despite numerous empty tables around them still available for lingering conversations. Mrs. Kim observed his behavior with the calculated assessment that had evaluated countless business opponents before responding not with anger but with quiet certainty, requesting their check be brought immediately along with contact information for the restaurant ownership group, as she wished to discuss potential investment opportunities, given how frequently she entertained international clients in Manhattan. The manager blanched visibly as realization dawned that his dismissive treatment of an elderly Asian woman might impact not only his employment but the entire establishment, especially when Mrs. Kim casually mentioned her ownership of the commercial real estate housing 6 similar upscale restaurants across the city. His stammered apologies fell on indifferent ears as Mrs. Kim focused entirely on Amber, asking in Korean if her shift had concluded or if responsibilities remained unfinished, showing consideration for obligations others would expect her to simply abandon in light of their extraordinary circumstances. Golden afternoon sunlight welcomed them as they finally exited the restaurant together, walking slowly along the busy sidewalk, while pedestrians flowed around them like water around stones, each lost in thoughts too monumental for immediate processing, yet unwilling to separate now that connection had been established. Mrs. Kim spoke first, breaking their companionable silence to explain that her car and driver waited nearby, but she would understand completely if Amber needed time alone to process everything, offering her business card with personal contact information written on the back in elegant script, should she wish to continue their conversation another day. The subtle deference to Amber's autonomy, rather than presumption of immediate relationship, spoke volumes about Mrs. Kim's character, demonstrating respect for the adult woman before her, rather than claiming maternal authority over the infant she had surrendered decades ago. Amber considered the card, turning it thoughtfully between fingers, still carrying traces of restaurant aromas, before asking if perhaps they might continue talking somewhere more private, suggesting that certain conversations deserved better settings than public sidewalks or formal restaurants. Around them, Manhattan pulsed with afternoon energy, business people rushing between meetings, tourists photographing landmarks, delivery cyclists navigating traffic, all creating a backdrop of normalcy against which their extraordinary reconnection seemed simultaneously miraculous and perfectly ordinary, just 2 women discovering shared history among millions, each with stories untold. Mrs. Kim suggested dinner at her home where photographs and keepsakes might answer questions words alone could not convey, including images of the American soldier whose features Amber had wondered about throughout childhood, yet never expected to see. Amber nodded acceptance before explaining she needed 30 minutes to change clothes and leave a message for roommates who would worry about her unexplained absence, demonstrating the responsible nature she had developed without any knowledge of her birth mother's similar attention to detail and consideration of others. Their temporary separation was bridged by modern technology as phone numbers were exchanged, along with promises to reconnect within the hour, both women understanding that whatever path forward they chose would involve navigation of complex emotions, ancestral connections, and new possibilities neither had imagined possible when morning dawned, yet both now embraced with cautious hope under the same afternoon sun that had witnessed their first recognition hours earlier.